I have been using Claude Code for the past 6 months or so. And here's something that I find really strange when I use it. One of the most copied AI instruction files on the internet when it comes to Claude Code is the claude.md file. Now, thousands of developers clearly use it, possibly even you. There is some variation of it that's shared everywhere. Now, one version that is often associated with Andre Karpathy has been copied so many times that it's become the default starting point for almost everyone that uses Claude Code. And yet, there's a good chance that copying it has actually made your Claude worse. At the same time, Boris Cherny, the person who created Claude Code, uses a personal claude.md file that has just 2 lines. And those 2 lines mostly point to another file used by his team. Now that really got me thinking, why are so many people writing hundreds of lines of instructions while some of the people building these tools are writing almost close to nothing? Are they missing something? Are we missing something? So that's what today's video is going to be about. The answer to that question turned out to be hidden in a small detail within Anthropic's own documentation, which has completely changed the way that I look at these files. Now, let's say that you're working on a project with Claude Code. You ask it to build a feature. Now, most of the work is great, but it makes this one annoying mistake. Maybe it writes a test in a slow way when there's a much faster option available. Maybe it organizes files incorrectly. Maybe it keeps using the same pattern that your team just doesn't like. So you go in and you correct it. Now everything's fine. But then 2 days later, you start a new session. And Claude goes and makes exactly the same mistake again. Now the reason for that is very simple. Every session starts afresh. Claude doesn't automatically remember what happened in the previous conversation. So naturally, when you start looking for a place to store lessons that Claude can learn from session over session, that's where you need a file like the claude.md file. Think of it as a project note. Before Claude starts working, it always has to read that note. Now, you can use it to explain how your project works, what conventions your teams follow, and mistakes that you don't want it to repeat, which sounds quite useful. Well, the answer comes from understanding what claude.md really is. Most people assume that it's some special configuration file, something Claude is required to obey. It isn't. According to Anthropic's own documentation, claude.md is delivered to Claude as a normal message. That's it. It's not a system-level instruction. It's not a hard-coded behavior that Claude has to follow. It's not a contract. It's just a message. Claude reads it, tries to follow it, but it's still working through that information the same way that it works through the rest of the conversation. And that kind of changes everything. Because if claude.md is just another message, then adding hundreds of lines doesn't automatically make it more effective. In fact, it can make it harder for the important information to stand out. Imagine joining a new company. On your first day, someone hands you a 1-page document with 5 critical things that you need to know. You will probably remember them. Now, imagine that they hand you a 60-page document covering every possible scenario. Somewhere in there are 5 things that actually matter. Good luck finding them. The same thing is happening here. The more information you keep adding, the harder it becomes to separate what's important from what's just extra detail. Now, Anthropic even warns you about this. Very large instruction files can cause important information to get buried. Now, this raises a very obvious question. If huge files aren't the answer, what are the people building these tools doing themselves? Maybe the secret to the claude.md file that actually works for you lies right there. Now, Anthropic recommends keeping these files relatively short. But what's more interesting is that what experienced users actually do in practice. When you look at open source projects maintained by Anthropic, their instruction files are surprisingly small. Most aren't anywhere close to hundreds of lines. The same pattern shows up everywhere. HumanLayer published a guide on working with coding agents. Their example file is very compact. Mitchell Hashimoto, the creator of Terraform and Ghostly, uses an agents.md file that's only a few dozen lines long. And then there's Boris Cherny, the creator of Claude Code itself. His personal file is 2 lines, not 200, just 2. And most of the work is delegated to a shared team file. That's a very strong signal, because if the people closest to the technology are keeping things simple, maybe simplicity isn't a limitation. Maybe that's the goal. At this point, I have stopped asking how can I put this into my claude.md file. Instead, I ask what actually belongs there. Now, the more examples I looked at, the more I noticed that people were using these files in 2 completely different ways. Let's look at both extremes. One approach is what most people are familiar with. The file is full of instructions about how the AI should behave. Things like think before coding, prefer simple solutions, be careful with changes, keep things clean and maintainable. None of those things are bad. They're all reasonable things to ask. But notice what they have in common. They're not really about the project. They're about how you want the AI to think and act. Now compare that with a file like Mitchell Hashimoto's agents.md. The content is completely different. project. Instead of philosophy, it's mostly practical information. Here's how to build the project. Here's how to run tests. Here's how code is formatted. Here's what important files live. Here's what not to do. Very little coaching, almost no motivational advice, just information that someone joining the project would genuinely need. And that difference, turns out, matters a lot because one type of instruction ages very quickly, the other doesn't. Kat Wu, who leads the Claude Code product team at Anthropic, has talked about this idea before as well. If you create workarounds for weaknesses in today's model, those workarounds can become unnecessary as the models improve. Think about a rule like this. Think carefully before coding. Maybe that instruction helps you today. Maybe future models won't need that reminder at all. Now compare that with use this build command or store timestamps in UTC. Those instructions aren't about the model. They're about the project. They'll still be true regardless of how much smarter the models become. That's why project knowledge tends to age much better than behavioral coaching. Now, one describes your environment, the other tries to manage the model's personality. And over time, the project knowledge keeps its value. This led me to one of the most useful ideas that I have ever come across. Mitchell Hashimoto has a simple rule. Every line in your claude.md file should exist for a very specific reason. If you can't point to a real mistake that the instruction prevents, it does not belong there. Now, I really like that way of thinking because it changes the role of the file itself. Instead of becoming a wish list of things that you would like Claude to do, it becomes a record of things that you've actually learned over time on that project. A lot of teams arrive at the same conclusion from different directions. Boris Journey has said that when Claude makes a mistake repeatedly, that's when it makes sense to add guidance. Dan Shipper describes it as a form of compounding. Every correction becomes something that you don't have to repeat again. Now, the system gradually gets better because you're capturing lessons instead of rediscovering them. The best files I've seen aren't packed with rules, they're packed with lessons. Now, at this point, it's tempting to think that we've really solved the problem. Keep claude.md as short as possible. Store lessons, avoid unnecessary instructions, and you're done. But that's only part of the picture because claude.md was never meant to carry everything. Once you understand these layers, a lot of bad claude.md files start making sense. People are trying to solve every problem with the same tool. They're taking information that belongs in skills or subagents or hooks and forcing it all into one single giant file. And the result is obviously predictable. The file becomes bloated, important information gets buried, and everyone wonders why performance keeps getting worse. It's because you keep adding instructions instead of putting them in the right place. So that's how you use the claude.md file and a bunch of other files to get the most out of your Claude code. If you like this video, please subscribe to our channel, and you should probably watch this video next.